neurodiversity in mining. The purpose of it is really to bring the talents that neurodiverse people have and mining industry together. There is a lot to be learned and a lot to share there. And in that process, it will enhance the workplace for all of us. We all have our neurodiverse trait. That much is from me. Nathan?
Thanks, everyone. Someone will have to answer the doorbell as people are coming in. If not, they'll just have to wait for a couple of seconds there. So I heard Kelly speak on 2 different occasions. The first time was part of a DIAC, a CIM, Diversity and Action Committee webinar. And then I invited her to a Share It Bits Invite event, which is recorded, and we have it on the Bits Invite event as well. Today's seminar webinar will be recorded and will be put on the DIAC website after the fact as well. So let me just take a second to introduce Kelly. So Kelly Bron Johnson is an autistic and hard of hearing self-advocate. She's a speaker, author, and founder of Completely Inclusive. Her work focuses on breaking down systemic barriers in society and making the path easier for others. She's a certified psychological health and safety in the workplace advisor, and she's currently working towards a professional certificate in restorative justice from Vermont's Law School. Kelly, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. So again, thank you so much to all our sponsors and for everybody for being here. But a big thank you especially to Namita and Nathan for helping make all of this happen. So I want to start, I'll have a little agenda of what we're going to go over this evening together. In this short time, I feel like I always have so much information in a short time, but I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. And so to be honest, I used to be hesitant sometimes with giving land acknowledgements. And I want to make sure that the point is that it's not just lip service, that it's about the actions that we do every day and to be aware of these things. So I am joining you from Tiohtià:ke, which is colonially known as Montreal. It is the land of the Kanehkakaaga and the Haudenosaunee. And so every day I like to try and wake up and think about what I'm doing that I can make a difference. I'm waking up on this land that is shared and not mine. And so if there's things that you can do every day, certain actions that you can take to try and make a difference. So for example, I'm holding a fundraiser next month that is going to go to support the Open Door, which is a homeless shelter here in Montreal that primarily serves the Indigenous population. So if you want to support that, please get in contact with me, but otherwise think about things that you can do locally that you can make a difference in people's lives. So then I'll go into the completely inclusive vision and strategy. A small reminder of the definition of what neurodiversity is. Then of course, we'll get right into the meat of the benefits of neurodivergent minds. That's why everybody is here tonight. And then we'll go into the next steps and upcoming events. So I'm going to share very quickly just the mission and vision of Completely Inclusive, just to give you an idea of what I'm trying to do and I guess the foundation of everything that flows from this. So very quickly, the mission is to remove barriers and facilitate full participation and acceptance in society by ensuring companies are employing and accommodating the best, most diverse and skilled workforce, creating inclusive environments where everyone feels safe and respected as equals. Now, I want everybody to kind of look at these words that I use. I'm very particular about the words I use. And there's nothing in here that is really calling out a particular type of person. The point is that everybody can benefit from workplace accommodation. Everyone can benefit from acceptance in the workplace. And everybody can also benefit from having an accessible and a diverse workplace. So I don't actually call out disabled people. I don't call out oppressed populations. It's the idea that everyone can benefit from these kind of changes. And the vision is a world where everyone is accommodated and able to contribute to society in a way that is meaningful to them. a truly inclusive and diverse society where each person is rewarded for their particular contributions. And if you look at this vision, there's not even work mentioned in it. It's for people to contribute in a way that works for them. And the idea is to have this wonderful spread, not just from our workplaces, but into all of society, where people can feel valued and rewarded. And so this is a huge, huge dream, a huge vision, and I can't do it alone. So I'm calling on all of you tonight to join with me, and we can start to make society and the world a more inclusive place that's comfortable and safe and respectful. So I'm going to try and go into a bit about the strategy of how I approach this huge undertaking. And I like to do a top-down approach. And this is the reason that even on my LinkedIn profile, it says I work specifically with CXOs and business leaders. This turns out there's research behind this for this approach. You know, people always have these kind of conversations or arguments between the top-down or the bottom-up approach. I say there's room for both, absolutely, 100%. So when I say let's use a top-down approach, that does not mean to the exclusion of all other approaches. It's to me one of, and again, research backs this, one of the most effective ways, because what research has shown is that when you don't have top-down buy-in, that initiatives that middle management makes, when they make progress towards certain initiatives, they're often vetoed. And so without having CXOs and leaders on top really, you know, supporting this and really moving these things forward, no matter what the people do at the bottom, it will still make a difference, but it's not going to have the same impact. And what we're really looking for here is a long-term, you know, complete change and impact. That's how we change a culture. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind that there are systemic and intersectional issues all the time. So we're fighting under certain systems, and I don't mean fighting. We're trying to work under certain systems that are not always healthy and not always the best for people. So it's about kind of creating something new within that, and understanding that we can't just approach it from a siloed idea or for just one type of person. So this is not just about trying to approach neurodiversity on its own. And a lot of I guess the argument I get is that, well, we worked on gender last year, and then we'll work on race next year. And it doesn't really work like that, because we're all multifaceted people. And so we can't just look at it as, well, we'll only focus on neurodiversity, and we're not going to think about the other isms that we have to work with. If we're going to combat one, like classism or sexism or racism in the workplace, we have to do it as a multi-pronged approach. We have to approach all of them. If you just look at me alone, I have multiple identities with me, right? So trying to just say, well, we're not going to talk about LGBTQ issues, and we're only going to focus on Black issues, it's not going to help a person like me. So just be aware that we're working under systems that don't always work for us, but we've got to try and bring in these other facets and always be aware of it. And at least if you're aware of it, you can at least talk about it and approach it and come up with a strategy to try and fix it. Now, this is also not, I put in quotes, it's not just an HR issue. I do see a lot of the times people relegating diversity inclusion initiatives to the HR department. And of course, there's a value in having your HR department involved. There's obviously certain aspects that they touch on when it comes to employees and finding the right candidates, but it's not just for HR. It really has to be in all your departments, because again, if HR does one thing and the rest of your policies don't follow with that, they can find the best candidate and then put them in a situation where they're not going to fit because of the fact that the rest of the environment has not been changed for them. So you can have all the best hiring policies, but you can't just take that and then hope that it's going to work in other departments. It really is, to me, it's again, if we're working from the top down, I don't want to see just HR involved. It really is multifaceted, and it's going to affect every single part of your workforce. Basically, if there's an employee in a department, there needs to be somebody who is working on the strategy for that department as well. So wherever there's an employee, there needs to be a strategy. It's not just an HR thing. Now, at the same time, this, you know, a lot of times when I say I'm doing accessibility work, I'm working for and with disabled people, automatically people think it's a charity. They automatically think this is a nonprofit. And there's two things for that. One, you know, disabled people are not charity cases. That's certainly not what we're here for. We don't exist to be a charity case or to have pity upon us. Really what we should be looking at is it's the right thing for everyone. And like I said, because one accommodation or one way that we make a psychologically safe workplace is going to work for one person, but it's also going to work for, you know, 100 people at the same time. So the same way I like to use the example of using an automatic door opener. And you don't have to be a wheelchair user to enjoy the convenience of using an automatic door opener. You know, people who are pushing strollers, people who are carrying a lot of different bags, they can all use the automatic door opener. So you could say, well, I've made this accommodation to my office building to suit or to make it easier for people with disabilities. However, we know that it spreads out and is good for way more than just the people with disabilities. And I've been told as well, people say, well, if I don't actually need the automatic door opener, but I use it anyway, that's just lazy. And I say, no, actually I have two arguments for that. One, I don't really believe in the concept of laziness, but that's a different story. Two, making your life easier is something that everybody naturally wants to do. Nobody wants to make their lives harder. So there's nothing lazy about doing what you need to do to get the job done in an efficient way. People don't want to work inefficiently. Everybody wants to work in the most productive and most efficient way. So there's really no argument there. At the same time, there's actually a benefit for people using the automatic door opener, even if you don't need it. And I'll tell you this so that you can keep this in your back pocket. If you push the button and the door doesn't open, you need to report that to the building, either security or maintenance, whoever is in charge. Because the next person who needs it and is not going to have that available is going to be a problem. So you should always test those doors, test to make sure, because if you can't get in, that means the person behind you can't get in, or somebody who, you know, like I said, somebody who really needs it, has got their arms full, or they're a wheelchair user, they can't use it. So you have a reason now, even if you didn't need to use it. Now everybody has a reason to go and test your automatic door openers and make sure that they work. It's a good thing of the day. Now my last point about my strategy and the reason I do things this way, my why for doing things this way, is that I truly believe fundamentally that everyone belongs. And I truly believe there is some way for every person on this earth to make a difference in society. It doesn't mean that it has to be work. Doesn't mean that it has to be full-time work. There's tons of volunteering opportunities. There's many, many things that people can do. Or even if they're at home, they don't necessarily have to go out into the world to do things that make life worth living and make that contribute to society in ways that are positive for everyone. So I truly believe everyone belongs. Even more fundamentally than that, I do believe there are jobs for everyone. And people often question me on this because they say, what about, severely affected, such and such? What if the person seems to be so disabled and I froze, but I'm here. I really fundamentally believe that there is a way that people can have
Kelly, you went to mute. Okay.
That's because you muted me. Okay. I got muted. It's okay. I know that sometimes what I have to say is very challenging for people. You don't have to mute me. So yeah, everyone has a place. And I truly believe that no matter how we could say severely affected somebody is by their disability, that there is still a way that they can have a job. So before we even continue, we need to kind of have a little bit of reminder about what neurodiversity is in the first place. So neurodiversity is the concept that there is a natural variance of different types of brains, and that these are naturally occurring. The same way that, you know, some people have brown eyes, some people have blue eyes, some people will have different types of brains. And there will be challenges associated with this, but there will also be benefits to having different types of thinking. I don't know if we need to go that far into it, but I have seen people say that biologically or evolutionarily, there were benefits to, let's say, having somebody with ADHD in your group when we were living in the wilderness, to have somebody that was focused and able to, with sensitive hearing, that would hear animals in the dark coming to hurt people, or having somebody who has, you know, circadian rhythm disruptions, that so they're up all night and then they sleep in the day. And so I've seen different explanations. I think those are people kind of working backwards and are different skills. But the idea is that there's nothing really medically wrong, and we don't use the medical method of thinking of disability. We're looking at the social theory of disability, which is that there's just variance in brains and bodies, and that there's good parts and there's bad parts, but it's okay. They're all there, and they all have different benefits. So this includes Tourette's, epilepsy, mental health issues, TBIs, those are traumatic brain injuries. LDs are learning disabilities like dyslexia, dyscalculia. IDs are intellectual disability. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Dyspraxia, which is a movement disorder. FASD, which is FASD, which is fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, and more. So all of these things fit under this umbrella of neurodivergence, which includes neurotypical brains as well. So if we look at it as a spectrum from what we call neurotypical brains to neurodivergent brains. So neurodivergent is the word that we use for the brain that is different, and neurotypical is the word that we use for people who have a typically normal brain. In the case of neurodivergence, there are sometimes physical differences in the brain. There might be parts that are more developed or underdeveloped. There might be connections that are, there might be more connections or fewer connections, or there might be actual other structural issues that MRIs pick this up. So it's not just a way of thinking. There are often physical or structural issues to why this difference exists. And it's important to remember that it doesn't have an obvious look, and that by looking at someone, you can't tell how, you know, what their life is like. You can't tell what kind of challenges they go through. I like to use the example, and I kind of wish I had a video of it, but I don't really. I like to use the example of my eldest son. So my eldest son, if you just look at diagnosis, he's been diagnosed with autism. He has a borderline genius IQ. He's ADHD, and he has apraxia, which is a motor speech planning disorder. And if we go out for a walk and we're walking down the street, he is going to be flapping and humming and skipping, and he's actually beautiful. He's full of joy. And so he's mostly humming and flapping, and he'll be skipping down the street. And so the perception of him is that he's unaware, that he's nonverbal. And if you were to like try and engage him in conversation, he would likely not talk to you, especially if you're a stranger. He's not going to, you know, he wouldn't pay any mind. He's not the best with space, with personal space. So he might come kind of skipping down the street, and it can be kind of scary because people aren't sure if he's going to stop or not, or he might move at the last minute out of their way. And of course, now he's getting bigger and taller. So now here's this young man skipping and flapping down the street. But that's not what is going on in his brain inside him. Again, he's got a borderline genius IQ, and he speaks perfectly fluently now. And so the perception of him, if you look at him, people get the impression that he would be a very, that he's difficult to take care of, that he might even be aggressive because they're not quite sure what he's doing. They're not quite interpreting his body language. But he's the kind of person that would not hurt a fly. I still go into his room and kill spiders for him. Like he wouldn't, you know, he wouldn't do anything like that. And he's extremely intelligent. But it doesn't, to people's ideas, because of their misunderstanding of what, you know, autism is or what disability is, that's not the perception that they get. So it's important to kind of realize that how somebody is moving, how somebody's speaking, how someone is behaving is not necessarily indicative of where they're at cognitively and what they're capable of. So a lot of the time, people underestimate us and our abilities just because of how we look or how we work or how we dress and how we move. And there's actually been very interesting studies as well about the fact that autistic people actually move differently and walk with a different gait. So even if they say autism is an invisible disability, there are subconscious things that people are picking up on where they can tell that we are not exactly invisible. But I want to make sure that when we're talking about in the workplace, that we focus on the supports that are needed for each person and not the diagnosis. So there's a few important things here. One is that we try not to anticipate people's needs. It's really important not to anticipate somebody's needs. If somebody says, let's say either they disclose before an interview or they disclose sometime during their employment, to try not to anticipate what you think they might need based on their diagnosis. So, well, I'll take this back a little bit. Well, my diagnosis is an important part of my identity, and it frames how I see the world and everything and the way that I experience my life. And of course, it affects the way I work. The way or the things that I need in the workplace to accommodate me are not going to be the same as another autistic person. Even though, yes, we share a diagnosis, we might not all need the same things. So it's important that when we're looking, we need to look at individuals, and we need to think, outside the box, but we need to think about what that individual needs rather than kind of trying to change things in a way that might not work for a particular person, or to assume what they might need. Again, I always say that disabled people we come with our own accommodations a lot of the time. So if you're hiring somebody who's a wheelchair user, it's not like you have to go and buy them a wheelchair for them to work with you. They're going to come with their wheelchair. And the only thing that you have to do differently is to take the chair away from the desk that is there for them, and to give them space to wheel up to the desk, or you might need to get a higher desk. But the point is that you're not going to have to make tons and tons of changes in order for this person to work properly for you. And so it's very similar with a lot of other disabilities, where a lot of times we know what we need and we know what will work, but at the same time, if we're not 100% sure right away, we need to have a safe environment where we can have this open dialogue, because things do change. And it's not just for for people who come in with a diagnosis and have disclosed, but there's also the fact that you will have employees that will perhaps get a diagnosis later on in life while they're working for you. So I always like to say that the disability community is the only community that any person is just one accident or one sickness away from being a member of. It's literally the only minority group that you can join at any time in your life without any plan. And so it can happen to everyone. So we're not just trying to make changes right now for who we have right now in the workplace. We're also planning for things that can happen to any of us later on in life. So while, yes, we're focusing right now on tonight's talk about neurodiversity, like I showed here with things like traumatic brain injury or with epilepsy, those are things that you can develop later on. And so you can also become neurodivergent later on in your life, and also mental health issues, which are now 1 in 5 Canadians will suffer from one at some point in their life. So this is a group that when we're talking about making these changes and making these things, this is going to benefit everyone in the long run. Okay. So let's look a little bit at our strengths. Many of us, again, I don't want to speak about all neurodivergent people as a monolith, but many of us have a very advanced visual spatial skills, things that we can actually manipulate, 3D, 4D, many more objects in our brain and see, I don't want to say see things, but we can see, visualize in our brain, in our own head, certain things, and the way that we see data, the way that we see even art when we're drawing. There's a lot of very interesting things that can come out of our way of seeing the world. Many of us are pattern thinkers. We're logical, focused, methodological, I didn't even spell that right. I guess why. Methodical, thank you. Pragmatic, analytical, and detail oriented. And again, that doesn't mean all of us have these things. And even though we have strengths, and I am speaking about positives, I just want to also, not make it seem like everything is sunshine and rainbows. There are challenges associated with these. There's kind of a cost benefit. We can have challenges, but we do have some benefits from it. The challenges are what make it a disability. So no matter how talented we might be in one area, it's important to remember that we are still disabled, and that doesn't go away no matter how accommodated we are and no matter how accepted we are. I find what tends to happen is sometimes people will adjust to us in a certain way, and they'll start to see our benefits, but then they kind of assume that we don't need the same accommodations or we don't need the same support. We're still the same person. We still need the same things. And a lot of times it's because we're getting the support and the acceptance and the accommodations that we are getting from you, that we are able to then continue to improve and rise. But what's interesting about us, I think, is that we've been forced to function in a world that is not designed for us. Accessibility is usually an afterthought, and that comes with buildings, that comes with websites, that comes with healthcare. It's often an afterthought, the idea that somebody might need to have an accessible workplace. So we have to get creative, and that is where some of our strengths come in the sense that we are functioning in a world that wasn't designed for us, but we're making the best of it, and we found workarounds that allow us to succeed. But that way of thinking, that constantly being creative, constantly trying to come up with other ideas, and practicing that, using that on a regular basis, which I think everybody can benefit from as well. If you want to try that, to always challenge yourself in your thinking, if you're neurotypical, to come up with different ways of doing the same thing. Because that can have benefits for keeping your mind sharp as well. But anyway, all of these things can is part of the reason that we often think outside the box and often are more innovative, just because we have to be. So this can lead to, many more great careers than a lot of the times. A lot of these initiatives are focused on security or on IT, coding, and things. But we actually, neurodivergent people are in all walks of life, in all kinds of jobs right now. So again, there's a place for everybody. We make a lot of jokes that engineers are always kind of by default seem a little bit autistic. I think there's some truth to that. I get along very well with engineers, so whether they're neurodivergent or not, I don't know, but it's a way of thinking, I guess, that is conducive with the way that my brain works as well. But quality control, quality analyst, finance as well, all of those things are beneficial to different areas of the mining industry and to other industries, of course. So, like I was saying before, it's really important to not assume needs of people, that having an open dialogue with your employees, and this is with all your employees, things that can change, things that they might need that will help them to do the job to the best of their ability. And there's another study that I'm going to see if I can find it and send it to people because it's super interesting. But it was a study recently done where they asked people what gave them the most feelings of happiness at their work, and whether that was their salary. It was salary, and I think it was like vacation time. There were a couple of other different options, things that were more obvious that I thought people would pick. It ended up being what gave people the highest sense of satisfaction at their work was being able to do their job to the highest quality. So for what gave people the most satisfaction wasn't even money. It was that they wanted to do their particular job that they were hired to do and to be the best at doing their particular job. And so our needs will change over time, right? How we get to be the best at our job, that's going to evolve over time. And if you have a workplace where people are able to come to you and say, this is holding me back. I think this thing is holding me back. Is there a way we can work with this? Is there a way we can be more flexible? Is there a tool you can give me, a software? It doesn't really matter what it is. Is there something that we can do, that we can work together, that will make me be able to do my job to the absolute highest that I'm able to perform? And I think when we phrase it like that and we use it like that, rather than kind of assuming that, if somebody's struggling, let's not assume that they're disengaged. Maybe they're disengaged because they are lacking that ability to ask for what they need. So try to maintain an open dialogue with your employees, that people should be able to come and say, this is exactly what I need, or this is exactly what's happening in my life that's making me a little bit less, a little bit less on right now. But can you be patient with me while I go through this rough patch, perhaps? Or is there something that we can do that we can try and make it a little bit better or easier for me? So just having that safety ability to have that dialogue is so important. Now this, I love this, the job descriptions. Job descriptions. So, I mean, again, we're not just always talking about hiring, we are also trying to make changes that will be beneficial to people who are currently working with you. But please, my point here is not to say, okay, we're having a neurodiversity hiring initiative, therefore we're going to rewrite the job descriptions in a way that we think will fit what we think these people can do. And most of the time, our abilities are underestimated. And so they might lower certain standards or whatever, or they might offer a certain job in a certain way that is different from other people's because they think it might be too challenging for somebody who's neurodivergent, because that's just the perceived idea out there. And I say, no, please do not modify the job descriptions. Everybody should have the same, not everybody should have the same job description, but if it's the same job, those job descriptions should be well written in an inclusive way that would apply to anybody, whether or not they're neurodiverse or not. What's really important about job descriptions, if we want to have them inclusive, we need to look at inclusive language that we're using. We need to take out a lot of the ableist requirements that are in there. So an example of an ableist requirement is when you are asking, let's say, a front desk receptionist to be able to lift 50 pounds. I understand that, let's say, mail and packages are going to be delivered to your front desk at the same time. Does the receptionist have to be the one that's going to be lifting it and moving it to another area of the office? Is it possible that that package that is too heavy for somebody to move on their own, let's say, should just sit at the front for a little while until somebody or somebodies who are able to come and move it, do that task? So why put it in a job description for somebody to lift 50 pounds when something like that is something that doesn't happen every day? And the focus on your receptionist should be somebody who is friendly, who is able to answer many phone calls and able to greet your customers in a way that is warm and respectful and upholds the values of your workplace. And then discounting this person because they can't lift 50 pounds, you've just struck people out for absolutely no real good reason. When we look at other job descriptions, I laugh because a lot of times you'll see these on LinkedIn where a place was asking for 10 years experience in a particular coding language, but that language has only existed for the last 3 years. And in one case, I saw one where they were looking for like many years of experience with the coding language. And the person who created the coding language had only created it like 3 years before. So he would have actually been discounted from that job because it was impossible for anybody to have that kind of experience. So those kind of a very, it's a comical what do we call it, example, but it's important to look at the job descriptions and important to look at what we're actually doing and who we're leaving out in this process when we're making job descriptions that have things that are simply not possible. And there's many examples of those kind of things where we're basically discounting people and not allowing people to come in. Very important here as well when it comes to communication, because I say, communication absolutely goes both ways. And there's a great study, or at least there's more than one study, I think now, of how there's a couple of things that happen. And this is very specific between the studies have been done on autistic people and neurotypical people. So I'm not sure, because I can't include all neurodiversity in there or neurodivergent people in there. But autistic people specifically, one interesting thing is that we communicate very well with each other. They found when they did studies that we get our point across. We do communicate differently, but we communicate just fine together. We don't have these kind of misunderstandings. The problem occurs when a neurotypical person and an autistic person are communicating, especially if the neurotypical person is expecting the autistic person to communicate the same way as them. So it's important because there are a lot of misconceptions. There are a lot of ways that autistic people, specifically our communication, is perceived in a negative light. oftentimes our body language is perceived to be negative. I'm always very somewhat annoyed by these body language coaches that say, oh, if the person is not looking you in the eye, that they're not being honest, that they're shy. And that's simply not the case. A lot of times I might not be looking at people's eyes simply because I look at people's mouths often when they speak, one, because I'm hard of hearing, but also because it has always helped me process when I'm able to look at people's lips. So I will hear you better if I'm not looking at your eyes. I need to concentrate. If I'm looking at your, I'm going to be looking at your mouth. The unfortunate thing when it comes to that understanding with neurotypical people believe that when you're looking at their mouth, that you want to kiss them. So they inadvertently think that I like them or that I'm flirting with them, which is not the case. I am trying to understand them. So that's, you know, it's a funny example, but it's something that happens all the time, this disconnect of being perceived one way, acting one way, and it being a completely different interpretation on the other end. So I kind of advocate for neurotypical people to learn our language, to learn the neurodivergent or the autistic culture and language, and learn to communicate a bit like us. And because we're always on our end, the autistic people are always kind of changing to try to adjust, try and fit in as best as we can into neurotypical society. So as much as possible, try not to read too much into our behavior or to our ways of expressing ourselves. You know, a lot of times, if we're very straightforward, people see that as rude. Or, you know, in my case, I might ask a lot of questions, but for me, I'm trying to understand fully. And that can be interpreted as being insubordinate. Sometimes people will see it as rude that I'm asking a lot of questions. They think that I'm challenging them, when really I'm trying to really understand what I just heard to make sure that I've got it right. And it's not, I'm not even asking in a challenging way, but the idea of asking questions or asking too many questions, there's some sort of arbitrary limit to how many questions the person's allowed to ask before they start being seen as rude. I don't know what it is. So I'm letting you know it's out there. You know, and there's things, I'm sure that there's things of the way I move that people can tell, you know, something's a little bit off about her and they're not quite sure how to interpret that. So as much as possible, if you can try and not read too much into things. If you're not sure what the person really meant by something, or if you're offended by something, or you're not sure if they're angry or not, that doesn't hurt to ask. It doesn't hurt to ask and to be honest and to be straightforward about these things. You know, I've also known that I've been perceived when I was very focused on my work, and I literally didn't notice anybody coming in. So if I didn't say hello, people thought I was ignoring them when really I literally didn't notice them at all. And so it's not that I'm being rude. It's not that I'm angry at somebody. It's just that I simply, I'm so focused that unfortunately they get missed. But if you want to say hi to me, you can always tap me on my shoulder and say, hey, that's okay too. So just to kind of be aware of those things in the workplace. And then finally, lastly, a lot of times, you know, we get out of our way let us do it our way. I've used this example before. If you've come to some of my other talks, there's an example of my son when he was very young and he was having speech therapy, and the speech therapist had this little toy box with a bunch of different locks and things on it. And she was working with him and he had to do certain tasks in order to open the different locks. And he ended up doing it in a different order, but the lock still opened. So he found a completely different way to get what he needed done. He just did it in a way that nobody had ever, she's like, I've never seen that before. I've never seen anybody try to do it that way before, but he still opened the lock. So in the end, he achieved the goal. Right? If we only look at it, well, the lock needed to be open and he did it. he did it in a completely unexpected way, in a completely different order, but he still did it. So when it comes to our workplaces, we can be really goal oriented and be very clear about the goal and the outcomes and say, we want to see this, and then get out of the way on how somebody achieves that. So one person is going to plan it out for weeks. They're going to have a deadline and they're going to work on it piece by piece by piece, systematically, you know, with a structure, and they're going to do things in a certain order, and they're going to have bits done. And then by the end, when it comes to the deadline, it's going to be done. And then other people, and this is unfortunately, fortunately or not, I don't know, the way I work is I know my deadline. If I don't have a deadline, I'm going to be stressed out. I need my deadline. So once I have my deadline, maybe it's hard to explain. I work backwards in my brain, but in a very strange way. And then in the night, in my dreams, for example, for this talk, I write my speech. It doesn't get written down. It's in my brain. And in my brain, I go through it, and it'll be 4 o'clock in the morning, and I will be up, and a piece of my speech will come in. Okay, that's going to be a slide. And then another night, it's going to come up again. Oh, okay, that's going to be my second slide. And it's all going to be up here cogitating or whatever, mixing in my head. And then one day, sometime before the deadline, I will sit down and it will all come out onto my computer screen in the order that I intended it to. And I know, and I always say when I'm working with Nathan and Nermina, I know it's very stressful for other people because they don't see anything happening in that time where I have my deadline, and you'll see one other person, you know, let's say a different employee who'll be working, you would see some progress. With me, you don't see progress. It's happening, but you can't see it. And if you ask me where I'm at in my process, I cannot tell you. I do not know. I don't work like that. But I know now that since my brain works like this, it's important that as long as nobody else gets in my way, for example, if somebody forced me to write it out and be methodical and do 5 minutes a day here and chop it up, I would hate the project. I would want to quit. I would not want to do it. I would get so stressed out. It would make me angry, like if I had to do it that way. And so unfortunately, what happens is when you're in the school system, you're often forced to do things a certain way. And there's been workplaces where people are forced to work a certain way. And it's very difficult. So when we are left to work in the way that works best for us, it is the most amazing, magical thing. And so I know it's difficult because, again, especially with me, you don't see progress, but you have to trust that when I say there's a deadline, that it will be there. And I trust this. I have another autistic friend that I work with that I've done talks with. Same thing where I saw no evidence of him doing anything. The night before one of our conference talks, he's like, "Oh, well, do you want to look at the slides now?" And for me, that was too close to the deadline. And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Anyway, but we get there, and he was late. I remember he was late for this, but when the time came and it was our time to speak, he was there, he was prepared, and it worked. So it takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of faith and a lot of trust. I understand that. But it's another great example would be if you tell two people that there's a trip that they have to get to, let's say two different people need to get to Tokyo by a certain date. And one person is going to, actually, I had a friend do something very similar. She was scared of planes. She refused to take planes. So she left from Sweden to go to China, and they did it all by train. They took a ferry, and then they took a train across, and they took the Siberian, the express there. Anyway, they went across, and they went to China that way. So obviously it took them like a month. Whereas another person is going to fly 12 hours, and they're going to be in China. But the point is that if you have the deadline, try not to worry about how the journey is being made. One person's going to take a bus, one person's going to take a train, one person's going to take a plane, whatever. They're all going to, as long as they all get there, as long as the work is done, as long as they were there on the deadline, try to focus on that as being what matters. Okay, enough about that part. So the next steps in all of this amazing program, wow, and I'm perfectly on time, is that the series will continue. There's going to be another 2 conversations. Next one is a panel of experts coming up, people that have implemented neurodiversity programs at their companies. And there's going to be a following webinar after that that's going to go kind of more deep into the strategy and to really making this happen. So enough talk. At some point, this is going to be something that we're all going to make happen. Like I said, you're on this journey with me. So let's do this. If you'd like a deeper dive with me or one-on-one, or we're thinking of starting a mastermind type group, you can use this link. I'll put it in the chat after for meetings at HubSpot at Bron, or you can always email me. And of course, you can always email Nirmina or Nathan if you know them and contact with them to also look at this and the ambassador program that we're trying to start. And just before we take questions, I just wanted to take another minute to thank our generous sponsors, Franco-Nevada and Kirkland Lake Gold, CIM, of course, and Sherritt, who have all come together to make this possible. So thank you so much. And I am ready for some questions.
Thanks, Kelly. A few comments and questions came in. First of all,